Before we begin, take a breath, get comfortable, because the story we are about to tell is one of the longest, most painful, most quietly magnificent journeys in the history of fantasy television. This is not a quick summary. This is the full thing. Every wound, every love, every betrayal, every resurrection, every sacrifice. Jon Snow's complete story deserves more than a highlight reel. It deserves the same patience and the same willingness to sit with hard things that he demonstrated his entire life. So, settle in. We're going all the way to the end. Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine being told, from the very first day you could understand language, that you are less. Not through cruelty, not through punishment, but simply through the way the world around you bends away from you like sunlight around a stone. You eat at the same table, you train in the same yard, you sleep under the same ancient roof. But when the great lords come to visit, when the feasts are laid out on the long tables and the candles glow warm against the gray stone walls, you are quietly, gently reminded that you do not entirely belong. That is how Jon Snow grew up. And that quiet exclusion, that lifelong ache of not quite fitting, was built on a secret so enormous it would eventually tear the entire world apart. Let us begin at the very beginning, not at Winterfell, but at a place called the Tower of Joy, deep in the sun-scorched red mountains of Dorne, in a moment that happened before Jon Snow ever took his first breath. Robert's rebellion had just ended. Robert Baratheon, a man of enormous strength and enormous appetite, had torn the Targaryen dynasty from the Iron Throne. The Mad King Aerys was dead. The capital burned with Lannister treachery, and somewhere in the south, in a lonely tower, guarded by some of the finest swordsmen alive, Eddard Stark arrived after the fighting was already over, not as a conqueror, but as a desperate brother searching for his dying sister. Lyanna Stark. She was Ned's younger sister, and the world believed she had been kidnapped by Rhaegar Targaryen, the Crown Prince, the man Robert had loved to hate, and ultimately beaten to death in the middle of a river with a warhammer. The story everyone told was simple and brutal. Rhaegar took Lyanna died, and Robert's grief curdled into a dynasty. That was the narrative. That was the comfortable lie. The truth was far more complicated, far more human, and infinitely more dangerous. What Ned actually found at the Tower of Joy was his sister alive, barely, lying in a bed soaked red, exhausted from childbirth. And in her arms, or perhaps set carefully aside, was a tiny baby boy. Lyanna Stark had not been kidnapped. She had run away with Rhaegar, the man she loved, the man she had secretly married in a ceremony that annulled his first marriage to Elia Martell. It was a love story dressed up as a scandal, and it had set the world on fire. Their child, their legitimate child, by the laws of gods and men, was the true heir to the Iron Throne of Westeros. Lyanna was dying. The birth had torn something vital out of her, and with what little strength she had left, she gripped her brother's hand and whispered a promise she needed him to keep. Robert would kill this baby. Robert, the man who had slaughtered Targaryen children in King's Landing, rather than let the dynasty continue, would absolutely destroy this small pink thing if he ever found out who its father was. So, Ned had to lie. Ned Stark, the most honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms, the man who would rather lose his head than bend the truth, had to carry a lie so heavy it would crush him a little more with every passing year. He looked at his sister's fading eyes and promised. The boy's name was Aegon Targaryen, but from that day forward, the world would know him as Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, the son of nobody in particular. Ned rode home with a baby and a story. The story was that he had been unfaithful during the war, that Jon was his illegitimate son, conceived with a lowborn woman whose name he would never clearly reveal. It was a story that damaged Ned's reputation for perfect honor. It caused genuine pain to his wife, Catelyn, who could never quite look at this boy without seeing her husband's supposed betrayal. It created a wall between Jon and the rest of the family that no amount of love could entirely dissolve. But it kept Jon alive, and that was all that mattered to Ned. Every cold shoulder from Catelyn, every awkward silence when guests arrived, every small humiliation Jon absorbed without fully understanding why, all of it was the price Ned paid to keep his promise to a dying girl in a tower far away. Growing up in Winterfell, Jon Snow was surrounded by everything he could not fully claim. He had 5 siblings, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon. and he loved them with a fierceness that the show makes achingly clear. His bond with Robb was the easy brotherhood of boys who wrestle in the snow and dare each other into impossible things. His connection with Arya ran even deeper, something almost mirrored and instinctive. Two people who felt slightly sideways from the world they had been placed in. Before Ned left for King's Landing, Jon had a sword made for Arya by the castle blacksmith. He called it Needle because Arya Stark knew nothing of needlework and everything of sharp things. That small gift is one of the most quietly revealing moments in the entire series. It tells you everything about who Jon Snow is beneath the brooding exterior and the gray eyes. Someone who pays attention to the people he loves, who gives practical gifts wrapped in deep understanding. The direwolf moment is often cited as the first real scene of the series that defines Jon. When Eddard prepares to have the direwolf pups killed, 5 pups for 5 true-born Stark children, and what would you do with a 6th? It is Jon who stops him. 1 for each Stark child, Jon says, and the runt of the litter can be mine. He claims the outsider wolf before anyone else can think to make the connection. Ghost, the albino with the red eyes, the one who is silent where the others howl, he becomes Jon's, because Jon recognized himself in a creature that did not quite fit the pattern of everything around it. Ghost is not an accident of storytelling. Ghost is a mirror. Ned's farewell to Jon is one of those moments that hangs in the air long after it has passed. Jon asks Ned desperately to tell him who his mother was. Ned says, "Next time they speak, he will." It reads like a casual promise between father and son. It is actually the last conversation they will ever have, and it contains the secret of everything. When the Ravens bring word of Ned's execution in King's Landing, Jon is already at the wall. He will never know his father's voice again. He will carry the question of his mother for years, that hole in himself that everything else rushes in to fill, until the truth comes crashing down on him far too late to change anything. What is so extraordinary about this section of Jon's story is how perfectly it embeds tragedy into the ordinary fabric of adolescence. Jon Snow does not know he is extraordinary. He does not know he is the rightful heir to the greatest throne in the known world. He does not know that his father's identity changed the entire course of history. He knows only that he is not quite a Stark, not quite anything. And that the wall, that ancient structure of ice and duty, seems like the one place where his status as a bastard might not matter, where what you are matters less than what you do. He volunteers for a life of poverty and celibacy and danger because it offers him something that Winterfell with all its warmth could not quite provide. A place where he can become someone on his own terms. There is another element of Jon's childhood that the show handles with graceful economy and deserves more attention than it typically receives. The relationship with his siblings, and specifically the specific texture of how each of them relates to his outsider status. Robb, the eldest and the heir, treats Jon with the easy warmth of someone who has never had to think about legitimacy because it was never in question for him. As they roughhouse and practice swords and build snow fortresses on castle gates, hoping to avalanche someone walking underneath. There is no real complexity in Robb's love for Jon. It is uncomplicated brotherhood, and the show uses their farewell in the first episode to establish both how genuine it is and how permanent the separation will be. They embrace before Jon rides north. They never see each other again. Arya's relationship with Jon is built on a different frequency. The frequency of people who recognize each other as kindred outsiders. Arya does not fit the mold of a lord's daughter, any more than Jon fits the mold of a lord's son. She wants to fight and run and be reckless, not sit and embroider and practice courtesies. Jon sees this from the inside. Is from the position of someone who has been told what he is supposed to be and found it doesn't fit. And he honors Arya's authentic self rather than trying to correct it. The sword needle is an act of profound love. It says, "I see who you really are. I think who you really are is worth protecting. Carry something sharp." Bran is too young to have a complex relationship with Jon during the early Winterfell sections, but there is something worth noting in the fact that Bran is the one who ultimately unlocks the truth of Jon's parentage, years later, through his three-eyed raven visions. The Stark siblings are bound to Jon's story in ways that span the entire length of the show. And Sansa, who is perhaps the most complex relationship of all, they were never close at Winterfell. As separated by temperament and interest, and the gap that Jon's status created, becomes, after the horror of Bolton captivity and the resurrection, something like his most important political partner and his most significant source of both support and conflict. The Sansa and Jon relationship in the final seasons is one of the show's great underexplored territories. Two people who love each other without entirely understanding each other, making decisions based on different information and different theories of how the world works. The cultural machinery of bastardry in Westeros deserves a moment of acknowledgement here, because it is not arbitrary cruelty. It is a systemic technology for preserving the inheritance of legitimate children by making sure that children born outside of marriage cannot claim the father's name, titles, or property. Bastards in the north take the surname Snow, a word that suggests cold, blankness, something without color or warmth. Bastards in the south get Storm, or Flowers, or Rivers, or Sand, all the names of their regions, all carrying the same stigma, just differently wrapped. The system exists to keep property in legitimate family lines, and like most systems that exist to protect property, it creates enormous human collateral damage along the way. Jon Snow is not simply a boy with a sad story. He is the walking embodiment of everything that Westerosi class structures do to people who arrive in the world in the wrong way, regardless of their actual qualities. And here is the cosmic irony. The boy carrying the most stigmatized name in the North is actually the most legitimate heir in the entire history of Westeros. His bastard name is a lie, protecting him from the violence that his real name would attract. The system that marks him as lesser is the same system that keeps him alive. Jon Snow is simultaneously the most degraded and the most privileged person in the known world, and he does not know either thing about himself. The story of Lyanna and Rhaegar ripples forward through everything that follows. It is the stone dropped in the water before the series even begins. Every wave Jon ever rides, every choice he makes, every sacrifice he offers, every tragedy he absorbs, travels back to that tower, to that dying woman, to a promise kept at enormous cost. Jon Snow is a child of ice and fire, in the most literal sense imaginable, the blood of the frozen north running through one side of his veins, and the blood of dragons burning through the other. Yet he is both things at once, and for the entirety of his life, neither world will entirely claim him. That tension, belonging everywhere and nowhere, is what makes Jon Snow the most tragic hero in the show. It is not just that bad things happen to him, though they certainly do, in spectacular and relentless fashion. It is that he is constitutionally incapable of being selfish enough to protect himself. He has inherited Ned Stark's bone-deep commitment to doing what is right, even when it costs everything. And he has inherited a destiny from his Targaryen blood that makes him uniquely positioned to absorb the worst consequences of that commitment. He is the man who does the right thing and gets punished for it. Over and over and over. And yet he never stops. That is what makes him worth watching for 8 seasons. That is what makes him worth talking about still. So, the secret of Winterfell sits at the heart of everything. A baby in a tower, a dying girl's wish, and a good man's lie. Jon Snow did not know who he was, but who he was shaped every single step he took. The world knew him as the bastard of Winterfell, the gods knew him as Aegon Targaryen, and the story knew him as something older still, the man born to carry the weight of a world that would never fully deserve his loyalty. There is a scene very early in the show that encapsulates all of this before a word has been said about politics or prophecy. Jon and Ned stand in the courtyard at Winterfell after King Robert Baratheon and his court have arrived, and the household is in an uproar. Ned stands straight, greeting his king, displaying the great lord with the same practiced ease that comes from a lifetime of preparation. Jon watches from a slight remove because this is what bastards do. They watch from a slight remove. They are in the picture but not of it, and there is a look on Kit Harington's face in this moment, a careful, quiet watchfulness that the show will return to again and again across 8 seasons. Jon Snow observes more than he speaks. He understands more than he reveals. And the gap between what he knows and what he says is the gap that duty fills, always. That observational quality will serve him enormously at the Wall, where reading people accurately, reading their fear and their pride and their breaking points, is the skill that separates good leaders from dead ones. Hey, if you're watching this right now, so drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. Whether you're watching from your bedroom at 3 a.m. or your lunch break somewhere out there in the world, I genuinely love knowing who's out there listening. And if you're enjoying this deep dive, A subscription to the channel means everything. It lets me keep making these long-form stories. Now, let's keep going. Section 2. Taking the Black. There is something almost peaceful about the idea of the Wall, if you have never actually seen it. 300 miles of ancient ice, that's been 700 feet high, stretching across the entire top of the world, from the shivering sea to the Bay of Ice. The largest structure in known history, built by men and giants, and possibly something older still after the Long Night, 8,000 years ago. From a distance, but from the safety of a warm room in a southern castle, the Night's Watch sounds almost romantic. Brothers in black, holding the last line of civilization against the darkness. Noble, self-sacrificing, eternal. The reality, of course, is rather different. By the time Jon Snow arrives at Castle Black in the first season, the Night's Watch has become a shadow of its ancient glory. Where once it commanded tens of thousands of men drawn from all the great houses of Westeros, it now fields fewer than 1,000, most of them criminals, debtors, and failures who took the Black to escape punishment. The Black itself, that ancient oath of no land, no wife, no children, no crown, is not so much a noble calling as it is a last resort for men with nowhere else to go. The great castles along the Wall stand mostly empty. Ghost villages and hollow towers, monuments to an era when people believed the threat was real. Jon arrives with his uncle Benjen Stark, first ranger of the Night's Watch, a man of genuine purpose and quiet intensity. He also arrives with a set of expectations that the reality immediately, brutally corrects. He expected comrades. He found ragged, bitter men who resented his noble bearing and his easy skill with a sword. He expected to be among warriors. He found thieves and runaways who had never held a blade properly in their lives. He expected to feel at home in a place where birth didn't matter. He found that it matters everywhere, always, because the resentments of men are portable things. His training period is one of the show's most underrated sequences. Jon, raised by a lord, trained by the finest swords at Winterfell, he cuts through his fellow recruits in the training yard without even trying. And rather than being grateful for a clearly gifted sparring partner, the other boys, Gren, Pypar, the rest, simply despise him for it. There is a moment early on where Donal Noye, the one-armed blacksmith, pulls Jon aside and tells him the truth without mercy. He is nothing but a bully, a lord's son playing soldier among real men who had hard lives before they ever came to this place. Jon does not respond the way most young men would. He does not argue. He does not sulk for long. He listens, and then he changes. That capacity for genuine self-correction is one of the things that makes Jon Snow different from almost every other major character on the show. Most characters in Game of Thrones are defined by what they cannot learn. But Cersei cannot learn that love without power is useless. Daenerys cannot learn that good intentions are not sufficient armor against the seductions of absolute power. But Jon keeps absorbing lessons that make him better. He starts helping the other recruits train instead of humiliating them. He protects Samwell Tarly, the soft and bookish boy who becomes his first true friend at the Wall, from the cruelty of the other men. He does not do this because it costs him nothing. He does it because it is right. Samwell Tarly deserves his own moment here, because the friendship between Sam and Jon is one of the great quiet love stories of the entire series. Not a romantic love, but the love of two people who recognize something essential in each other. Sam is everything Jon is not. In terms of physical capacity, he is overweight, terrified of pain, is terrible with weapons, and entirely unsuited to the warrior life his father forced him into. But Sam is brilliant and kind and braver than he will ever believe about himself. Jon sees all of this at once. He puts himself between Sam and the cruelty that would otherwise break him. He makes the rest of the recruits accept Sam as a brother, and in return, Sam gives Jon something he does not even know he needs: unconditional friendship with absolutely no agenda. Sam never wants anything from Jon except Jon. That is rare in Westeros. That is rare everywhere. Lord Commander Jorah Mormont is another transformative figure in this section of Jon's story. Mormont is the kind of leader who commands respect, not through intimidation, but through the sheer weight of lived experience. Yet he is old and gray and carries the authority of someone who has spent a lifetime doing hard things for insufficient reward. And he is still doing them. He takes Jon on as his personal steward, not, as Jon initially thinks, as a punishment for his sword skills being wasted on errands, but as deliberate preparation for command. Mormont tells Jon, with that gruff northern plainness, that he intends Jon to lead one day. He gives Jon the sword Longclaw, a Valyrian steel blade that was passed to him from his own family. This is a gift of extraordinary trust from a man who does not give trust easily. Jon will carry Longclaw through every battle of his life, and the sword will eventually save the entire world. But even as these bonds of friendship and mentorship take shape, and the world beyond the wall is shifting in ways that make all of it feel suddenly very small. Benjen Stark rides out beyond the wall on a ranging mission and does not come back. Not in the way ranging missions normally don't come back, with an explanation and a recovered body. He simply vanishes. And then one night, 2 dead rangers return to Castle Black and attempt to kill Lord Commander Mormont. Except they are not men anymore. They are something else, something cold, something that burns when you hold fire to it and only dies when the flames reach it. Jon saves Mormont's life by throwing a lamp at one of these reanimated things, and the act confirms something that most of the Watch has been trying politely to pretend is not true. The dead are walking. The threat is real. Yet Jon takes the vows of the Night's Watch before a weirwood tree rather than in the castle sept, which is quietly meaningful. He is kneeling before the old gods, the gods of the first men, the gods who watch through carved white faces in the heart of ancient trees. In the books, this choice is even more deliberate. Jon has always felt more first men than Andal, more northern than southern, more primal instinct than civilized calculation. His vows are to the Night's Watch, but they are spoken in a place that connects him to something older than any order or institution, to the deep magic of a world that predates human kingdoms and will outlast them. The vows themselves are worth sitting with for a moment. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. Oh, I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch, for this night and all the nights to come. Jon Snow will discover later, in the most painful way possible, that this vow contains a loophole no one planned for. What happens when the Watch does end in death, and then the death is reversed? What is owed by a man who died and came back? But that is a later question, a question for a later Jon Snow, who has seen things the boy taking these vows cannot imagine. The boy, kneeling before the weirwood, is simply committed. He means every word. He will give everything he has to this place, to these people, to this purpose, and they will kill him for it. Yet the weight of the weirwood itself matters here. Jon chooses to swear before the old gods, the gods of the first men, the ancient faith that predates the Andal invasion and the construction of the septries and the elaborate theology of the seven-faced deity that governs southern religion. The old gods do not speak. They do not send prophets or write holy books. They watch, through carved white faces in the hearts of ancient trees, with red sap running like tears or blood, and their watching is the only answer they give. There is something appropriate about Jon Snow's vow being made in this older, starker tradition. He is not bargaining with a personal god. He is simply making a commitment in front of something very old and very patient, and something that has seen enough history to know exactly how much vows are worth, and exactly how often they need to be kept anyway. The White attack on Mormont is worth dwelling on, because it is the moment the show explicitly confirms the supernatural premise it has been building toward since the very first scene. The series opens, before the credits of the pilot, with 3 Night's Watch Rangers encountering the army of the dead north of the Wall. One of them is killed. One of them goes mad. Only one survives to carry the warning south, and he is executed for desertion before he can be believed. The show's first image is the threat that Jon Snow will spend his life fighting, and the show's first lesson is that the institutions designed to respond to that threat will punish the messengers before they believe the message. Jon's entire arc is prefigured in the first 8 minutes of the pilot, when the Dead Ranger rises in Lord Commander Mormont's quarters and Jon burns it down, burning himself in the process, grabbing the lantern with his bare hand to stop the creature from reaching Mormont. It is the first physical cost Jon pays for protecting someone else. He will pay this cost again and again in escalating currency. A burned hand, 3 arrows, 4 knife wounds. The psychological toll of watching everyone he cares about die while he keeps surviving. The cost of protecting something is always paid in the thing you cannot afford to lose. And for Jon Snow, the thing he cannot afford to lose is usually the people he loves. Maester Aemon is a character who only gets a few substantial scenes, but whose significance to Jon's arc is enormous. He is, at the time of the show, nearly 100 years old, completely blind, and one of the sharpest minds still alive in Westeros. He is also, as the show eventually reveals, a Targaryen, the last of his line before Jon Snow, a great-great-uncle several times removed, who refused the Iron Throne when it was offered to him and chose to remain a Maester. He has lived his entire adult life watching events from a distance, unable to act, knowing who he was and what he was giving up and choosing duty anyway. When he talks to Jon about what it means to choose duty over everything else, he is not speaking abstractly. He is speaking from a century of practice. The conversation between Aemon and Jon about love, about how love is the death of duty, yet how you must fight for all of them rather than just the ones you love, is one of the series' most important pieces of thematic framing. Aemon says, "What is honorable? What is right? How can you know?" The answer he offers is essentially stoic. You cannot always know if you are right, but you can know if you are consistent, and consistency in difficult circumstances is the closest thing to wisdom the world offers. Jon will have cause to remember this advice more than once. He will also have cause to discover that it is insufficient, that there are moments when honoring the logic of duty leads you to a place you cannot justify to yourself, and that the only honest response to those moments is to act against the script. Again, the closing movement of Jon's early time at the Wall sets up the long story with the signal flare of the White Walker threat. The Night's Watch rides out beyond the Wall in force. The Great Ranging, Mormont calls it, to find Benjen, to investigate the growing strangeness, to understand what is coming. They number several hundred men. Most of them will not come back. The Ranging is the beginning of the end of the Night's Watch's institutional pretense that the world is as it has been for the last 100 years. The world is not as it has been. Something ancient and cold and patient has been waiting in the darkness north of the Wall, and it has been waiting long enough that it has stopped waiting. Jon Snow's arc from this point forward is built on a single recurring pattern. He sees the truth before anyone else will admit it. He does what the truth demands, and he pays the price. The Great Ranging is the first act in that pattern. He rides north knowing it is dangerous, with limited resources and a command structure that is already creaking under its own accumulated compromises. But he goes because that is what you do when you have taken a vow. Night gathers. The watch begins. It shall not end until his death. And for Jon Snow, death, it turns out, is not even the end of the obligation. Section 3. Beyond the Wall and the Wildling Woman. Here is the thing about the free folk. The people the rest of Westeros calls wildlings as a slur, that Jon Snow will spend years learning, and the rest of the country will spend centuries refusing to understand. They are not the enemy. They never were. Yet they are people who chose a different answer to the same fundamental question that everyone south of the Wall had to answer. Who do you owe your loyalty to, and why? South of the Wall, the answer became dynasties and bloodlines and hereditary titles, lords and kings, and the elaborate social machinery of a feudal order. North of the Wall, the answer became simpler. You owe loyalty to someone worth following, and if the person claiming your loyalty stops being worth it, you leave. Simple, honest, and utterly incomprehensible to anyone raised to believe that birth determines destiny. Jon's education in the reality of the free folk begins with Ygritte, and it is the most important education of his life. The scouting mission that brings them together is itself the product of crisis. Yes, the Great Ranging has pressed further north than any ranging in living memory. They have found the remnants of the Fist of the First Men and the evidence of what the army of the dead can do to organized human resistance, which is to say, everything that can be done. Jon is part of a small party led by the legendary Qhorin Halfhand, a ranger of extraordinary reputation, sent ahead to gather intelligence on the wildling movements. They catch a small wildling group by surprise, and Jon captures one of them rather than killing her. Her name is Ygritte. Rose Leslie's performance as Ygritte is one of the great gifts of the entire series. She is fierce and funny and devastatingly perceptive, and she delivers the show's most memorable recurring line, "You know nothing, Jon Snow," in ways that shift its meaning depending on context. Mia sometimes affectionate, sometimes devastating, always true. From the moment of her capture, she reads Jon with an accuracy that he finds both irritating and impossible to dismiss. She sees through the careful performance of a Night's Watch brother to the uncertain young man underneath. She knows he will not kill her. She knows it before he does. She escapes and recaptures him, and in doing so, neatly reverses the power dynamic in a way that Jon is not entirely sure how to process. The intelligence mission becomes something more complex when Qhorin Halfhand makes a decision that will haunt Jon for years. Captured by the wildlings, facing certain death, Qhorin orders Jon to infiltrate Mance Rayder's forces by appearing to defect. To earn the trust of the wildlings, he must fight Qhorin to the death and win. It is one of those horrifying moments where doing the right thing and doing a terrible thing are exactly the same action. Jon kills a good man, a mentor, a member of his own order, kills him with Qhorin's own silent, deliberate consent, and in doing so becomes something the wildlings will accept. A crow who turned his cloak, a man who chose freedom over duty. The irony, of course, is that Jon never actually makes this choice. He is still a spy. He is still loyal to the Night's Watch. He is playing a role, but Ygritte cannot know that, and neither can Mance Rayder. And as the months pass and Jon travels with the wildling host learning their culture and their rhythms, the performance becomes increasingly complicated by the fact that parts of it start to feel genuinely true. In Mance Rayder is another character the show handles with real care. A former member of the Night's Watch who abandoned his vows to live freely north of the Wall, Mance is not the savage war chief that Jon expected. He is thoughtful, magnetic, politically sophisticated. A man who has unified 100 squabbling wildling clans into something approaching an army through sheer force of vision and personality. He is moving his people south, not because of conquest or cruelty, but because of what is behind them, something cold and dead and growing. He knows about the White Walkers. He knows the army of the dead is real. He is doing the only thing that makes sense, which is to get his people to somewhere they might survive. This is not the behavior of an enemy. This is the behavior of a leader facing an existential crisis. Jon sees this, and it will take the rest of the world considerably longer. The cave is where everything tips over into something irreversible. Jon and Ygritte, climbing the wall with a group of wildlings, take shelter in an underground cave warmed by natural hot springs. It is one of those pockets of impossible warmth and privacy in a landscape otherwise defined by cold and exposure. What begins there between them is technically a violation of Jon's vows to the Night's Watch. Brothers wear no crowns and win no glory, and, importantly, love no women. But it is also the most honest thing Jon has ever allowed himself to feel. Ygritte does not see his bastard status. She does not see a crow or a spy or a political complication. She sees a man. She sees Jon. And for someone who has spent his entire life being seen primarily as what he lacks rather than what he is, this is intoxicating. Their relationship in the season 3 and 4 period is the heart of Jon's emotional arc, and it deserves to be taken seriously, rather than treated as a mere romantic subplot. Ygritte challenges every assumption Jon carries from his southern upbringing. She shows him the wildling culture from the inside. Its humor, its directness, its refusal of false hierarchies, its genuine egalitarianism in matters of sex and choice. The free folk do not kidnap or coerce. When a wildling man wants a woman, custom says he must steal her. But stealing in this context means impressing her enough that she allows it, and any woman worth wanting can refuse. Ygritte's people live lives of genuine freedom at tremendous cost, as fighting the cold and the darkness and the endless threat of the dead with none of the infrastructure that makes southern life comfortable. There is something admirable about it that Jon cannot simply dismiss. But the spy's dilemma deepens as the wildling plan solidifies. Mance intends to breach the wall, not just climb it, but break through it, using a strike from the south coordinated with an assault from the north. He intends to bring his entire population through into the Seven Kingdoms, and the Night's Watch will be in the way. Jon is torn between two genuine loyalties: the men who took him in and became his brothers, and the woman who saw him clearly and the people she fought for. There is no clean answer. There is no version of this that ends without someone he cares about getting hurt. And when the moment comes, when Jon breaks from the wildling party and gallops south to warn Castle Black, it is the right choice, or at least it is the choice Jon can live with. He is a man of the Night's Watch. He took those vows in front of the old gods. But Ygritte knows what he has done the moment he rides away, and she does not forgive him for it. She pursues him, she shoots him with arrows as he escapes. She could have killed him, and she didn't, because she is Ygritte and love makes complicated things of simple ones, but she makes sure he knows she tried. You know nothing, Jon Snow. She has been saying it since they met. Now, she means something specific by it. He does not know that betrayal has a cost, and that the cost is the thing you most wanted to keep. Jon arrives back at Castle Black with 3 arrows in him and collapses. While Maester Aemon removes the arrows, Jon heals, physically, in a matter of weeks. The other wound takes considerably longer. He has chosen duty over love, and he has done so knowing it was the right choice, and also knowing it might be the choice that kills him, because Ygritte is coming back. They are all coming back. The assault on the wall is inevitable now, and whatever happens when the wildlings arrive, one of them will be her. The tragedy of Jon and Ygritte is not simply that they come from different worlds, though they do. It is that they are both right. Ygritte is right that the two peoples should not be enemies. Jon is right that duty demanded what it demanded. They are both doing what they believe, and what they believe leads them directly toward each other with weapons drawn. George R.R. Martin has spoken about wanting to write stories that feature not villains, but people with genuine competing values who cannot all be right at the same time. Jon and Ygritte are the purest expression of this idea in the entire series. There is one more thing worth sitting with here, which is the broader significance of Jon's time beyond the wall. The wildling host he travels with is not merely a military force. It is a migration. Mance Rayder is leading his people away from the army of the dead, and when Jon finally understands this completely, it reframes everything. The Night's Watch tradition of treating the free folk as the enemy has been, in some essential way, a catastrophic misunderstanding lasting thousands of years. The people north of the wall are not the threat. They are refugees from the actual threat. And because neither side would stop long enough to understand this, the actual threat kept growing unchecked in the darkness. Jon spends years trying to correct this misunderstanding. He will eventually succeed. It will cost him almost everything he has. The other thing to understand about this period of Jon's story is how much it changes him physically and psychologically from the boy who left Winterfell. He goes north as someone with a theoretical education in warfare and a strong practical foundation from training in a lord's castle. He comes back as something else, a soldier who has fought and survived in conditions that break most men, a spy who has had to live a performance so long that pieces of it started becoming real, and a man whose heart has been opened by love and then cracked open by loss. He is harder and softer at the same time, more capable of violence and more capable of mercy, more certain of what matters and less certain that he knows how to achieve it. The version of Jon Snow who returns from the wildlings is the version who will eventually become Lord Commander, who will make the decision to bring the free folk through the wall, who will be murdered for it, and who will come back from the dead still committed to the same logic. The Beyond the Wall section is not just a romantic adventure with some spycraft attached. It is the making of the man. Ygritte did not just break his heart. She expanded his understanding of what human beings are and what they deserve. The wildlings did not just test his loyalty, they gave him a model of what a community of equals might look like. And he carries all of it back through the wall with him, lodged in the same chest as the grief, and he never puts it down. Section 4, The Battle at the Wall. The attack on Castle Black is where the series stops being a political drama for an episode and becomes something older and louder, a straight-up siege story with genuine stakes and that particular flavor of grief that comes when you know exactly who the casualties are going to be. The Night's Watch defense is massively outnumbered. Mance Rayder has an army of tens of thousands on the far side of the wall. Within the castle itself, there are barely 100 men capable of fighting, led in the moment by Jon Snow, because most of the senior officers are either incompetent, absent, or both. What is remarkable about the battle for the wall is how it uses the physical space of Castle Black to create genuine tactical suspense. The wall itself is a vertical battlefield. The wildlings climbing from the north face not just height, but temperature. Every 100 feet colder, the winds more brutal, the ice more treacherous. Below them, inside the castle, Alliser Thorne leads the defense on the walls, while Jon organizes the resistance in the castle yard. Alliser Thorne, who has despised Jon since his first day at the wall, fights magnificently when the moment requires it. This is one of the show's subtle complications. A man can be genuinely brave and genuinely wrong at the same time. Yes, the giant Mag the Mighty, attempting to lift the enormous tunnel gate, is one of those unforgettable images. The scale of the threat made physical in a way that no human enemy could match. Donal Noy, the one-armed blacksmith who once cut Jon down to size with the truth, holds the tunnel alone against the giant and dies doing it. There are 100 small deaths in this battle, each one carrying the accumulated weight of seasons of characterization. Every name you recognize in the casualty list is a little grief that was being prepared for you all along. But it is Ygritte's death that matters most, in terms of what it does to Jon and what it does to the story. She is in the middle of the castle yard, bow drawn, having shot at least 2 people Jon cares about. And there is a brief moment where they see each other clearly across the distance and noise of battle. It is one of the show's most quietly filmed instances. The chaos around them seems to recede slightly. Neither moves. And then Ollie, a young boy whose parents were killed by a wildling raid, a boy with every reason to see only an enemy, shoots an arrow through Ygritte from behind. She falls. Jon catches her. She dies in his arms. And the last words she says to him are, "You know nothing, Jon Snow," delivered not as accusation or mockery now, but as something halfway between tenderness and grief, a final acknowledgement of the unbridgeable distance between them. They loved each other. They killed each other's people. The world did not give them a place to put both of those things and have them coexist. She dies knowing that he cared, and knowing that caring was not enough to change what had to happen between their 2 peoples. Jon cremates her body beyond the wall, in the haunted forest where she was born and lived. It is the only thing he can give her. He does it in the middle of a military crisis, with Stannis Baratheon's forces arriving to rout the wildling camp and change the political landscape of the North entirely. But he takes the time to do it right, to honor her with fire, the way the free folk honor their dead, to stand at the pyre and let himself feel the loss before the next impossible thing presents itself. That small act, the insistence on grief in the middle of chaos, tells you everything you need to know about who Jon Snow is in his bones. Stannis Baratheon's arrival at the Wall changes everything in ways that Jon will only fully understand later. Stannis is the self-proclaimed rightful king of Westeros, a man of absolute rigid principle who genuinely believes in duty and law above almost everything else. He is also militarily competent in a way that most people in Westeros are not, and he immediately recognizes in Jon Snow someone worth attending to. He offers Jon something extraordinary: legitimization. Stannis will make Jon a Stark in name as well as blood, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, if Jon will help him retake the North from the Boltons who now hold it after the Red Wedding. Jon says no. He is Lord Commander of the Night's Watch now, elected by his brothers in a vote that surprised everyone, including Jon. He will keep his vows. He will stay. Stannis, a man who understands duty if nothing else, respects the answer, but the offer lingers. Because it articulates the tragedy of Jon's situation so plainly, the one thing Jon Snow always wanted: to be a Stark in truth as well as feeling, to have the name that he carries in his heart made legitimate by the law, is being handed to him, and he refuses it because something else matters more. That is Jon Snow in miniature. The thing he wants most is always the thing he sets aside. The wildlings bury Ygritte's ashes. The wall stands. Mance is captured. The Night's Watch has held, barely, against a force that should have overwhelmed it. And Jon Snow, who organized the defense, who carried real authority in a crisis for the first time, looks across the battlefield and understands something that will define everything that follows. The wildlings were not the enemy. They never were. And they were running from the same darkness he has been looking at since that night in the yard of Castle Black, when a dead man tried to kill his Lord Commander. The army of the dead is the enemy. Everything else is distraction. He knows this. And now, as Lord Commander, he will have to make the rest of the Watch know it too. He already suspects they won't like it. He has no idea how far their refusal will go. Section 5. Lord Commander. Being Lord Commander of the Night's Watch is, in theory, one of the most powerful positions in Westeros. You command the ancient order that guards the realm. You have authority over a chain of castles stretching the width of the continent. You bear responsibility for the first and last defense against whatever comes from the north. In practice, in Jon Snow's case, it means being in charge of fewer than 1,000 men, most of them resentful, in a deteriorating castle with no money, no support from the South, and a growing certainty that the force you are expected to defend against could not be stopped by all the armies in the world combined. There is something worth noting about the institutional decay of the Night's Watch by the time Jon leads it. This is an organization that once commanded tens of thousands. In the age of the great Targaryen kings, it was staffed by second sons of noble houses, men who gave up inheritance for honor and meant it. Now it is populated by thieves, poachers, debt runners, rapists, and a handful of men who came by choice and mostly regret it. The castles along the wall are ghost towns. The equipment is deteriorating, the training is inadequate, yet the morale is barely worth the word. Jon Snow inherits a dying institution at the exact moment in history when that institution most needs to be alive and fully functional. The choice this places before him is not the dramatic choice of the hero in a fantasy story. It is the grinding, unglamorous choice of an administrator trying to save something from its own entropy. He has to make the Night's Watch functional enough to do what needs to be done, with the resources he has, in the time he has, over the sustained objection of the people who are supposed to be helping him. This is leadership in the most unglamorous and most real sense. Not the inspirational speech before the battle, but the relentless daily work of making an institution stop betraying its own purpose. Jon's election as the 998th Lord Commander is, like most of the best moments in Game of Thrones, unexpected and quietly wonderful. He ties with Alliser Thorne, his long-standing antagonist, the man who despises him and makes no secret of it. And it is Maester Aemon, ancient and blind, who breaks the tie in Jon's favor. Aemon is a man of enormous significance in Jon's life, not merely as an ally, but as a parallel case, a Targaryen who chose duty over the throne, who stayed at the wall when his brother became king, who spent a century in the cold because he believed the Watch was more important than personal glory. Jon does not know yet why Aemon's faith in him feels specifically meaningful. He does not know yet that they are both Targaryens making the same choice in different eras. Jon's first acts as Lord Commander are instructive. He beheads Jon Slint, yet the coward who refused a direct order, doing it himself with Longclaw rather than delegating it, a deliberate echo of Ned Stark's rule that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Stannis, watching, nods approvingly. Jon Snow has learned from his father. He enforces the rule fairly, without cruelty and without hesitation, and then moves on. The lesson Jon draws from Ned is not the one that eventually destroys Ned. Jon does not confuse performing honor with being effective. He is capable of hard choices precisely because he does not need the choices to look clean. Samwell Tarly, ever present, ever loyal, ever brilliant in ways that armored men with swords consistently underestimate, advises Jon throughout his tenure as Lord Commander. Sam's intelligence is the complement to Jon's instinct. Sam reads the books, researches the history, finds the connections that no one else would think to look for. It is Sam who eventually discovers the critical piece of information that dragonglass, obsidian, volcanic glass, can kill White Walkers, having found it buried in the archives of Castle Black. It is Sam who will later, years down the road, find the records that confirm Rhaegar's secret marriage to Lyanna. Sam is Jon's memory and Jon's research department and Jon's truest friend, and the show honors that friendship more consistently than almost any other relationship in it. The decision that will ultimately get him killed is also the decision that will eventually help save the world. He chooses to bring the free folk through the wall, not as captives, not as slaves, as people. He argues, in front of his own deeply hostile brothers, so that the wildlings left north of the wall are not an enemy to be held at bay, but a pool of living human beings who, if they die north of the wall, become part of the army of the dead. Every wildling who falls to the White Walkers rises again in their service. The math is simple and horrifying. You cannot defeat an army that grows with every casualty you inflict on anyone near it. You have to get people through the wall before the army of the dead can claim them. This logic is correct. It is completely correct. And it is completely unpopular with a Night's Watch that has spent its entire institutional existence treating the free folk as the enemy. These are men whose families were raided by wildlings, whose friends were killed at the wall, who signed up for an order that defines itself in opposition to everything beyond that boundary. And asking them to invite that opposition through the gate is not just a tactical decision. It is a demand that they discard the narrative their entire identity is built upon. Most people cannot do that. Most people will punish the person who asks them to, even if asking is an act of extraordinary courage. The episode called Hard Home is where this entire arc finds its defining visual expression. Jon sails to a wildling settlement on the coast beyond the Wall, arrives with an offer of safe passage to the south, and begins the difficult, halting work of convincing terrified and hostile people that the man wearing black is not their enemy. He gets through to enough of them. They begin loading onto boats, and then the army of the dead arrives. Yes, the Hard Home sequence is often cited as one of the great television set pieces of the 21st century, and the praise is deserved. The direction builds dread with extraordinary patience, a thick mist rolling across the water, then the silence of something just outside the palisade, then the gates giving way and the dead pouring through like a physical tide. The fighting is terrifying because it is asymmetric. The dead do not tire, the dead do not feel fear, the dead fall and get up and keep coming. The living fight brilliantly and fall anyway. Jon kills a White Walker with Longclaw in this sequence, and the discovery changes everything. He raises his Valyrian steel blade against the Walker's ice spear, expecting it to shatter. Every other weapon has, and it doesn't. And the White Walker's spear and Longclaw collide, and both survive the impact. And in the gap of astonishment that opens in both of them, Jon drives Longclaw through the Walker and watches him explode into fragments of cold air. Valyrian steel kills White Walkers. Sam has been theorizing about this for seasons. The confirmation, in the middle of a battle, feels less like triumph than revelation, a key found in a burning building. The Night King watches this from the cliff above Hardhome. He has been standing there throughout the battle, observing, directing, utterly unhurried. When he watches Jon kill his lieutenant, his expression does not change to rage or alarm. It shifts into something that might be respect or recognition. He lifts his arms, all of the dead from the battle, every wildling who fell on those docks. Yet every boat that came close enough to shore rise as whites. The Night King turns and walks away. He leaves Jon and the survivors on their boats, watching thousands of fresh blue eyes open among the corpses on the shore. The message is not, "I will destroy you now." The message is, "Look what I can do. Look how many I have. And look how many more there will be tomorrow." Jon sails back to Castle Black with the survivors, knowing that every person he could not save is now part of the army he has to stop. The boat ride back is one of the series' most effective uses of sustained silence. Kit Harington's face in those final minutes says everything that cannot be said with words. Exhaustion, grief, the specific weight of someone who has just seen the full scale of what they are up against and chosen not to run from it. He returns to his men. His men are furious at him for bringing wildlings through the wall. He explains again that there was no other choice. They do not believe him. They do not want to. What follows is the mutiny, and it is worth understanding exactly what makes it so devastating. Jon's assassination is not the random act of a few bad men. It is the systematic product of months of grievance and misunderstanding. Alliser Thorne leads the faction that cannot forgive Jon for the wildlings. Bowen Marsh, Othel Yarwyke, and others follow. They are not evil men. They are frightened men who have decided that their fear authorizes what they are about to do. They set a trap using the one weakness Jon has left exposed: his love for his uncle Benjen, who has never been found, who Jon has never entirely stopped looking for. The trap says Benjen has been seen. Come quickly. Come outside. Jon steps into the courtyard and reads the sign. Traitor. They come at him in turns, each saying, "For the watch before they drive in the blade." Alliser Thorne, Bowen Marsh, Othel Yarwyke, and then Ollie, young Ollie, the boy whose parents were killed, the boy who killed Ygritte, the boy Jon has protected and forgiven and tried to explain the world to. Ollie drives in the last knife. Jon Snow falls face first into the snow. His last word is ghost. And then there is only cold and dark and silence. For the watch. The phrase is supposed to mean something noble. It is supposed to invoke the tradition and the duty of the ancient order they all serve. Here it means fear dressed up as principle. It means the inability to understand what serving really demands. And Jon Snow died protecting people who will become part of the army of the dead. The men who killed him did so in the name of an institution that exists to prevent that army from winning. Section 6. Death and resurrection. There is a question that the show only partially answers, and the answer it gives is characteristically quiet and stripped of easy comfort. When Jon Snow comes back from the dead, what comes back? Is it the same man? Is something lost or altered in the crossing? Is there a price for returning from nothing? Beric Dondarrion, who has been resurrected 6 times by the time we meet him, tells Jon later that each time he comes back, he is a little less than before. Pieces of memory go. Pieces of self go. You keep what matters most, the broad shape of who you were, but the fine detail erodes with each crossing. Eat like a painting left in the rain. Beric barely remembers his life before his first death. He knows he had a purpose, a thing he was supposed to do, and he keeps doing it because the Lord who brings him back apparently believes it still needs doing. But the personal specificity of him has worn down to almost nothing. Jon remembers everything. He wakes up gasping, with every wound the knives made still burning in his flesh, and he looks around the room and knows exactly who he is and exactly what was done to him and exactly who did it. He tells Davos and Melisandre, "I saw nothing. There was nothing." The darkness that Beric talks about finding on the other side, the cold, the deep, the distant warmth, none of it, just absence. The bluntest possible theological statement. When you die, there is nothing. Not peace, not judgment, not reunion. Nothing. It would be easy to read this as a nihilistic answer, a statement that meaning is ultimately empty. But Jon's response to this revelation is not despair. It is a kind of freed clarity. If there is nothing after death, then everything must happen here. If the dead are walking and the living are the only counterweight to an eternity of frozen servitude, then the only response to having been given back your life is to use it for the thing that matters most. Jon Snow returns from the dead and immediately asks, "What do I do now?" What he does first is tidier than it is satisfying, but necessary. He convenes the execution of the men who killed him. Thorne, Marsh, Yarwyke, and young Ollie stand before him in the yard of Castle Black, and Jon asks if any of them have last words. Alliser Thorne, magnificent in his terrible consistency, it says that he had a choice between betraying Jon or betraying the Night's Watch, and that he hopes he made the right one. It is not a defense that changes anything, but it is not dishonest. Bowen Marsh hopes Jon will write to his mother. Ollie simply stares at Jon with pure fury and says nothing. Jon cuts the rope. He watches the bodies hang, and then he removes the Lord Commander's cloak, hands it to Dolorous Edd, and says, "My watch has ended." The loophole he has found is real. The vow says the watch ends at death. He died. His watch ended. He is no longer bound by those vows. This is technically correct in the way that the best loopholes always are, formally sound and spiritually absurd, using the letter of the law to escape its intent. But Jon Snow has given everything the law asked for. He died for it. The least it can do is let him go. Yet he walks out of Castle Black a free man. Free in the wildling sense, free in the sense that Ygritte meant when she talked about her people's freedom. And he has no idea where to go or what to do with this second life. The resurrection has stripped away the certainty of purpose that the Night's Watch provided even as it trapped him. He is standing at the beginning of something with no map. He knows roughly what he needs to do: stop the army of the dead, protect the living, find allies, but the specific shape of how to do it is opaque. He is, in the most fundamental sense, starting over. And then Sansa arrives. Sansa Stark, his half-sister, truly his cousin, though neither of them knows it yet, escapes from Ramsay Bolton and rides to Castle Black. Set the reunion between Jon and Sansa is one of the most emotionally satisfying moments in the series. They were never particularly close at Winterfell. Sansa, who wanted the life of songs and courtesy, and Jon, who was already slightly outside the frame, did not have much to give each other as children. But standing in that courtyard, after everything they have separately survived, they hold each other with genuine desperation. They are the last pieces of the family that is still standing and able to act. They are the North, if the North is ever going to survive what has been done to it. Sansa brings news that is also an ultimatum. Ramsay Bolton holds Winterfell. Ramsay Bolton holds their brother Rickon. Ramsay Bolton has sent a letter of such breathtaking cruelty and specific threat that it cannot be ignored without accepting that the Starks are simply finished. Jon needs to fight. Jon, who has just died and come back and thought seriously about simply walking away from everything southward, looks at his sister, and chooses to fight one more time. Not for the Night's Watch, not for any institution, for his family, for the name he was never given but always carried in his blood. The second life of Jon Snow begins here, and it is in some ways harder than the first. He knows now that death is survivable but costs something. He knows that the people closest to him can be the ones who destroy him. He knows that doing the right thing is no protection against punishment, and he does it anyway. Because the alternative is to become someone who stands aside while the people he loves are consumed by a world that doesn't care about their survival. He is still Jon Snow. He still knows nothing in the way that Ygritte meant. Still operating without full information, still caught between truths that do not entirely fit together. But he is also something new, a man who has seen the other side and found it empty, and decided that the emptiness is precisely why the living have to fight. Section 7. King in the North. The journey to reclaim Winterfell is one of the great road episodes in the series, and not just because of the battles. It is a character study in the relationship between Jon and Sansa, two people who survive different kinds of horror and emerge from them with very different lessons about how the world works. As Jon wants to appeal to people's sense of justice and common purpose, he travels the north, calling on the old houses that once swore to House Stark, making the case that the enemy is real and the time to stand is now. Some answer. Lady Lyanna Mormont, in her early teens, delivering her refusal to bend the knee to anyone but a Stark in a voice that could cut stone, becomes an instant emblem of what the North means at its best. But many refuse. Lord Glover slams his gates. The Karstarks and the Umbers, seduced or coerced by Ramsay, fight against him. Jon assembles what he can: 2,000 free folk, a couple of hundred scattered northern loyalists, the handful of houses that remember what their oaths mean, and stares across the Math at an army that outnumbers him 2-1 and is led by someone who has made cruelty into a science. Sansa has different instincts. She has spent years learning in the court of Cersei Lannister, and then the even more lethal school of Littlefinger's scheming. She knows that you do not win in Westeros by appealing to honor alone. You win by having the resources and the leverage. She writes to Peter Baelish, who commands the Knights of the Vale, and does not tell Jon she has done it. This is the first small fracture in their relationship that will persist and widen through the rest of their time together. Jon plans the battle without knowing about the Vale army. Sansa knows the Vale army is coming, but cannot tell Jon when or from which direction. Both of them are holding information back from the other in service of what they believe is right. Both of them are doing it out of love. This is, in miniature, the eternal problem of collaboration between people who have different information and different instincts about trust. The Battle of the Bastards. There is a reason this episode still gets discussed as one of the finest hours in the history of television, and it is not purely the technical achievement of staging what was, at the time, the most expensive battle sequence ever filmed for the small screen. Over 600 crew members, 500 extras, 80 horses, 65 stunt performers, 4 camera crews over 25 days. The reason it works is that every chaotic moment of it is legible in emotional terms. You always know what is at stake and for whom. Ramsay's gambit before the battle is pure psychological violence. He releases Rickon, the youngest Stark, Jon's brother, on the boy, and tells him to run to Jon across the open field between the armies. Then he shoots arrows. One misses, then another misses, then another. They miss, and the gap closes, and Jon is galloping to reach Rickon, and the entire audience knows, in a way that Jon cannot bring himself to accept, that this is how Ramsay works. The last arrow lands just as Jon reaches his brother. Rickon falls. He was always going to fall. Ramsay never intended to let him live. The cruelty was not in the killing. It was in the hope. Jon charges the Bolton army alone. It is the worst tactical decision imaginable, and the only emotional response available to someone who just watched their brother murdered for the sport of it. Davos follows with the rest of the army, and the battle becomes exactly the meat grinder that it was designed to be. It with the Bolton infantry surrounding the Stark forces and compressing them into a killing circle of shields and spears and bodies. Jon is trampled underfoot, fights his way up through the press, and nearly drowns in the bodies of his own dead before the horn sounds and the Knights of the Vale arrive. The Vale cavalry breaks the Bolton formation like a stone through glass. The battle turns in minutes. Ramsay retreats to Winterfell, and the giant Wun Wun, the last giant alive, a creature from a world that has been disappearing for centuries, tears down the gate of Winterfell with his bare hands and collapses, riddled with arrows, one more loss in a day of losses. Jon enters Winterfell, beats Ramsay into the ground with his bare hands in the most viscerally satisfying fight in the series, and stops just short of death when he sees Sansa watching. That choice, to defer to Sansa, to recognize that this revenge belongs to her more than to him, is one of Jon's finest moments. He won the battle. He did not take the revenge. He understood the difference. Sansa gives Ramsay to his own dogs. It is the right ending for the wrong reason. Revenge as justice, which is not quite the same thing. But it is Sansa's to have, earned through suffering that Jon will never fully understand. Winterfell belongs to the Starks again. The Stark banner goes up over the castle. Jon has come home to a place he was never quite allowed to fully claim, and taken it back with blood and fire. The Northern Lords gather and acclaim Jon as king in the North at the insistence of young Lyanna Mormont, whose speech, one name, House Mormont, and we remember, the name of our king, catalyzes every hesitant lord in the room into commitment. Jon Snow is crowned. He accepts it with the expression of a man who is being loaded with another weight he did not ask for and will carry anyway. He is king in the North. He does not want to be king in the North. He wants to fight the dead. But the North needs a king, so he will be that too. Everything Jon Snow is present in this section of his story. The tactical courage and the tactical stupidity. The genuine leadership and the terrible communication. The love that drives him past the point of rational self-interest and into places where only luck and other people's preparations save him. He is not a perfect hero. He is better than that. He is a real one. Subsection 8, The Dragon and the Wolf. When Jon Snow sails to Dragonstone to meet Daenerys Targaryen, he is walking into the most cosmically freighted meeting in the entire series, though neither of them knows the full extent of it. He is meeting his aunt. She is meeting her nephew. They are the last two people in the world with Targaryen blood, standing on the volcanic rock that was the Targaryens' first foothold in Westeros, surrounded by the last dragons alive. The universe has been arranging this meeting for several hundred years. Daenerys, in the Season 7 period, is everything Jon is not on the surface. Powerful, established, certain of her destiny and her right to rule. She sits on a carved throne in a castle draped in her family's banners, and she has 3 dragons who listen to her voice, and 2 armies that have crossed an ocean for her. She is the most powerful person in the world, by many measurements. Jon Snow arrives with nothing but a conviction about what matters most, and an inability to be impressed by the things that normally impress people. His refusal to kneel at their first meeting is a defining scene. Daenerys expected acknowledgement of her claim. She expected the king in the North to understand that his crowning required her permission. Jon expected to talk about White Walkers. The gap between these expectations is both political and philosophical. And Tyrion Lannister, now serving as Daenerys' hand of the king, spends much of their early interaction simply managing the collision of 2 people who are both entirely right according to their own frameworks. Jon is right that the army of the dead is the most important thing. Daenerys is right that she cannot simply accept a king in the North who refuses to acknowledge her authority. They are both right. Neither will entirely back down. They spend weeks in this productive standoff before the threat from the North makes their differences academic. The gradual movement from political friction to genuine respect to love is handled with real craft in this season. They are recognizably similar people in the ways that matter most, both raised in the shadow of something they didn't ask for, yet both tested past the point where most people break, both constitutionally unable to simply walk away from the responsibilities they have been given. When they look at each other, they recognize something. "You are not alone," Jon tells her, in a moment of quiet that cuts through the political performance. He means it. She believes him. These are 2 people who have been genuinely isolated by their unique situations, and the recognition of a kindred loneliness is the foundation of something real. The mission beyond the wall is where the season both thrills and strains under its own ambition. Jon assembles a raiding party of improbable variety: himself, Tormund, Beric Dondarrion, the Hound, Gendry, Thoros of Myr, and a handful of wildlings, to venture north of the wall and capture a white, a living sample of the dead, to bring back south as proof that the threat is real, The logic is that no one in the South will believe the army of the dead without physical evidence, and physical evidence can only be obtained by going north. It is the kind of mission that makes tactical sense in about 5 minutes and falls apart under extended examination. But the show is committed, and the character dynamics of this particular group are interesting enough to carry the episodes. They capture their white. They are surrounded. They send Gendry running back to Eastwatch to send ravens to Daenerys. And then they wait, on a frozen rock in the middle of a frozen lake, while the army of the dead assembles around them, and Thoros dies of his wounds, and the cold and the weight of it all presses down. Daenerys comes. She comes with all 3 dragons, riding Drogon, and she turns the tide of an impossible battle with dragonfire in a sequence of unambiguous visual grandeur. Jon fights a rearguard action to buy time. Most of the party escapes, and the Night King, with casual deadly precision, kills Viserion, one of the 3 dragons, with an ice spear thrown from a distance that should be impossible. The dragon falls from the sky. The Night King raises his hands. Viserion rises from beneath the lake with blue eyes. The army of the dead now has a dragon. Jon barely survives. He is pulled from the freezing water by his uncle Benjen, who sacrifices himself to ensure Jon's escape. Another price paid in a long ledger of prices, by a man Jon barely knew but was shaped by in his early life. Jon arrives back at Eastwatch more dead than alive, and Daenerys is there, waiting. She has seen him fight, and she has understood, watching from Dragonback, that he is exactly what he appears to be, someone who stays in the fight to the last second, so everyone else can get out. When he calls her his queen from his sickbed, it is not political calculation. It is acknowledgement. She has earned it with 3 dragons and a willingness to fly into a disaster because he needed her to. Their relationship deepens into love on the voyage south. The show stages this beautifully and then immediately intercuts it with Bran and Sam figuring out the truth of Jon's parentage in Winterfell. The camera moves between 2 people falling toward each other and 2 people uncovering the reason why that falling will end in catastrophe. Rhaegar and Lyanna were lawfully married. Jon is not Ned's bastard. He is Aegon Targaryen, the legitimate son of the heir to the Iron Throne. He outranks Daenerys in the line of succession. He is her nephew. She is his aunt. The world they are sailing toward will know all of this soon. Sam tells Jon the truth in the Winterfell crypts, in the very first episode of Season 8. The setting is not accidental. Jon is lighting a candle for the man he believes is his father, surrounded by the stone likenesses of Stark lords and ladies, the only history he has been given. Sam says, "Your mother was Lyanna Stark. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. You've never been a bastard. You're Aegon Targaryen, true heir to the Iron Throne." Jon's first reaction is indignation on behalf of the man who raised him. "My father was the most honorable man I've ever known. You're saying he lied to me all my life?" Sam says, "Ned Stark protected you. Was Ned Stark kept his promise to your mother? Everything Ned did that seemed like dishonor, the bastard son, the secret, the refusal to name your mother, was love." Jon receives this not with joy but with the kind of sick vertigo that comes when the floor you have been standing on turns out not to be floor at all. He is not a Stark. He has never been a Stark. The name he always wanted, the legitimacy he was denied, the belonging that he spent his whole life reaching for, none of it was his to claim in the first place. He has been living in the wrong story entirely. The real story is worse. He is the rightful heir to everything. And everything he has done in the name of Daenerys, every knee he bent and every political alliance he built, was done on behalf of a woman who is actually his subordinate in the line of succession. A woman he loves, a woman who is his aunt. He sits with this. He does not announce it. He goes and fights the dead, because the dead do not care about succession. Section 9, The Long Night and the Broken Kingdom. The Battle of Winterfell is the largest single military sequence ever filmed, and it is also, for many viewers, slightly disappointing in the ways that its aftermath requires, because the Night King is destroyed by Arya Stark, not by Jon Snow. And for a large section of the audience, this was a narrative bait and switch of significant proportions. Jon Snow is the character who has spent 8 seasons building toward the confrontation with the dead. He is the one who discovered Valyrian steel kills White Walkers. He is the one who fought the Night King's army at Hardhome and stared across the water as the dead rose. He is the one who organized the armies of the living, and in the final moment, he is pinned down by a reanimated Viserion, screaming defiance at a dragon he cannot stop, while his sister sneaks through the darkness and does the deed with a piece of Valyrian steel in a snap of cold air. There are readings of this that work beautifully. Jon was never the chosen hero in the traditional sense. Game of Thrones has spent 8 seasons systematically dismantling the trope of the chosen hero. The idea that a young girl who trained in the darkness of Braavos, who learned to move without being seen and to wait without being impatient, should be the one to end the Night King, rather than the tall man with the famous sword, is entirely consistent with what the show believes about how the world actually works. As the person best suited to the specific action is not always the person whose story has the most obvious arc toward it. The real world does not reward narrative logic. And yet the specific cost to Jon in this moment is worth naming, because the tragedy of Jon Snow is not only in what happens to him, but in what is taken from him by the story's own mechanics. He has sacrificed everything: his vows, his relationships, his political standing, his life itself, in service of this confrontation. The confrontation is resolved in his absence, by someone else, in a way he could not have planned. He was right about everything that mattered, and he ended up irrelevant in the moment it mattered most. This is not a criticism. It is a piece of the tragedy. The aftermath of Winterfell and the movement toward King's Landing. Beyond is where the show's final season accelerates past the emotional capacity of its running time. Daenerys has lost a dragon. She has lost Jorah Mormont, her most loyal advisor and oldest friend, who died defending her at Winterfell. She has watched her armies diminished. She has come to a foreign country and found the people cold and unwelcoming and more interested in their own king than in her. She is isolated and grieving, and the revelation of Jon's true identity, which spreads first to Sansa and then outward, has begun to erode her authority before she has consolidated it. Jon tells Daenerys he cannot keep the secret. It is wrong. His sisters need to know. Daenerys tells him that telling them is a mistake, that secrets spread and become power, and power challenges her. She is right, tactically. Jon is right, ethically. And they are at the same impasse they have always been at, the same one they arrived at on Dragonstone in Season 7. Two people with different but coherent value systems who cannot be made to fully align. Jon tells Sansa, Sansa tells Littlefinger, or rather, the show compresses this, and the secret moves south. The burning of King's Landing is the catastrophic pivot of the final season. Daenerys, perched on Drogon above a city that has rung the bells of surrender, chooses to burn it anyway. The Lannister army has surrendered. The small folk are running. The bells are ringing. And Daenerys stares at the Red Keep, where Cersei Lannister sits with all of Daenerys' losses and all of Daenerys' grief gathered into a single target, and she makes the choice her father would have made. She burns it all. And Jon is on the ground in King's Landing watching this happen. He watches his men carry out atrocities in the name of their queen's command. He sees civilians burning. He tries to stop what he can and cannot stop any of it. He is witnessing the birth of the tyrant that Daenerys always feared she might become. And the worst of it is that she is not mad in the way her father was mad. She has not lost touch with reality. She has simply decided that this destruction is acceptable, that breaking the wheel requires wheels to burn. She is wrong in the most consequential way a person can be wrong. Jon stands in the ashes of King's Landing the next morning and looks at the Iron Throne standing somehow intact amid the devastation, and understands that the thing he has been fighting for, the realm, the living, or the world, cannot be saved by a queen who has decided that the world must be remade through its suffering. He has Tyrion's voice in his ear. Sometimes good intentions destroy more than bad ones, because bad intentions recognize limits and good ones don't. Love is more powerful than reason, and sometimes love is the death of duty. There is a parallel in Jon's situation to Jaime Lannister and the Mad King that the show explicitly draws. Jaime killed Aerys to prevent him from burning King's Landing, and he was called Kingslayer for it until the end of his life. Now, Jon faces the same choice, with the woman he loves and the woman who saved the world with her dragons. He goes to her. She is in the throne room, her hands on the Iron Throne, and she has achieved exactly what she always wanted. Yes, they talk about what good means, and what justice means, and what freedom means, and they are speaking different languages with the same words. She kisses him. He kisses her back. And then, in the coldest possible moment, he drives a knife into her heart. She falls. Drogon, who senses her death from somewhere outside, flies into the throne room and nudges her body with the same gesture a dog makes when it cannot wake a sleeping person. And then Drogon burns the Iron Throne. Not Jon. The Iron Throne. As if the dragon understands, at some level beyond language, that it is the thing that did this, the prize that bent her toward destruction, the wheel that could not be broken and had to be melted. Drogon picks up Daenerys' body and flies east and does not return. Jon is imprisoned. He spends weeks in a cell. Yet there is a power vacuum in Westeros, of a kind the show has never seen before. No Iron Throne, no queen, no obvious successor, an army of unsullied demanding justice for their queen's killer, and a fragile new political order trying to assemble itself from the rubble. Tyrion, from his own prison cell, proposes a solution, a great council of lords, choosing a king, and Bran Stark, Brandon the Broken, the three-eyed raven, the man who can see all of history and knows the future is a long story worth caring for, becomes king of the Six Kingdoms. The North, at Sansa's insistence, becomes independent. Jon's punishment, the compromise that keeps the peace between Grey Worm's demand for execution and the Northern Lord's refusal to allow it, is to return to the Night's Watch. It is a sentence that has a hole in its logic large enough to walk an army through. The Night King is dead, the wall is broken in the east, and the wildlings have long since settled south. What is the Night's Watch for now? What is the wall guarding? The political fiction of the sentence is thin enough that everyone in the room seems to understand it is not quite real. It is the form of punishment without the substance. An exile, not an execution. A removal from the political center of a world that no longer has a political center. Section 10. The True North. The final scene of Game of Thrones is Jon Snow riding north of the Wall with the Free Folk. No crown, no castle, no title, no army, just a man and his direwolf and a group of people who were once called savages by the realm that just exiled him. In moving into territory that used to be the most dangerous place in the known world and is now simply the North, empty and cold and entirely free. Let us think about what this means, because it is easy to mistake it for a defeat, and it is also easy to mistake it for a simple happy ending, and neither reading is quite right. The truth is more complicated and more interesting than either. When Jon Snow first volunteered for the Night's Watch, he was 16 years old and running away from a life that had no clear place for him. He joined an ancient institution because it seemed like the one place where what you are matters less than what you do. It turned out to be true, but not in the way he expected. The Night's Watch did not resolve his identity problem. It gave him a new one. He was the bastard who tried to change the Watch's relationship with the Free Folk. The Lord Commander who made impossible choices for good reasons and was murdered for them. His identity at the Watch was defined by everything he was trying to dismantle. Going beyond the Wall now, with the Free Folk, people he has known since he captured Ygritte in the Skirling Pass, people he has fought alongside and bled with and wept for, and led into the teeth of the army of the dead, is different. It is not running away. It is returning to the one place in his life where he felt, briefly, and with tremendous cost, genuinely free. The cave with Ygritte. The knights in the wildling camp learning that the other side of the wall was full of people, not monsters. Yet the hard-won understanding that the Free Folk are simply people who answered the question of loyalty differently. Jon Snow is not the king beyond the wall, in the political sense. He does not seek that title, but in the oldest sense of what it means. Someone who has placed himself outside the walls of the institutions and the games of power and the relentless machinery of status. He has finally arrived where the story was always taking him. The tragedy of Jon Snow operates on several levels, and they need to be held together to understand why he sits at the top of the conversation about Game of Thrones' central figures. The first tragedy is the structural one, the one built into his very existence. He was born the secret heir to everything in a world that would rather destroy him than have that secret told. His mother died for him. His father figure spent 17 years lying for him. The lie protected him and also made him. The lie gave him Ned's values and Ned's honor and Ned's particular blindness to the political realities that honor cannot fix. The truth, when it finally came, brought him not glory but a fractured relationship with the woman he loved and a target on his back from everyone who feared what his claim meant. In conventional fantasy, the Secret Prince story ends with the throne, The boy who was nothing is revealed to be everything, and the revelation brings power and closure. Jon Snow's Secret Prince story ends with exile. The revelation of his true nature does not bring him power. It is actively taken from him, used against him, wielded as a tool for Daenerys' paranoia. His Targaryen blood does not save him. It haunts him. It is the origin of his greatest losses. This is exactly what George R. R. Martin said he was trying to do with this story. Ask, what if being the secret prince is actually terrible? What if destiny is a burden disguised as a gift? The second tragedy is the relational one. Jon Snow loved 3 people across the span of the series with his whole heart. Ned Stark, who could not tell him the truth. Ygritte, who could not survive the conflict his choices required. And Daenerys, who could not resist becoming what she feared. Every great love of his life ends in a version of the same pattern. He does what he has to do, and it costs him the person he was doing it for. Ned is executed by the political machinery Jon chose to step away from. Ygritte dies in the battle made inevitable by Jon's divided loyalty. Daenerys dies by Jon's own hand because she destroyed the world Jon spent his life trying to protect. He is not the reason these things happen. He is not a jinx or a curse, but he is consistently the person who does what is right and absorbs the casualties of it without, crucially, becoming someone who stops doing what is right. The tragedy of Jon Snow is that moral integrity is not self-protective. He suffers for his principles because his principles are real, and real principles in a world that runs on compromise and cruelty will always draw fire. The third tragedy is the political one. He was the best candidate for the Iron Throne by almost any measurement, and he never got to sit on it. He had the bloodline. He had the leadership experience. He had the genuine popular support of the North and the credibility of someone who had literally died and come back for the cause. He had already proven, multiple times, that he was capable of making hard choices and enduring the consequences. He never wanted the throne. He refused it, implicitly, every time it was offered or made available. His consistent preference for duty over glory, for responsibility over reward, is the quality that would have made him a great king, and is also the quality that ensured he never became one. This is the deepest and most intentional irony in his story. The man most suited to rule is the man least interested in ruling. Every king who has sat the Iron Throne in the show's timeline wanted it, fought for it, believed they deserved it. Jon Snow did not want it, and had a stronger claim than any of them. The system rewards hunger. Jon Snow was never hungry for power. He was hungry for purpose, for belonging, for the chance to be useful in a world that desperately needed usefulness. Power would have been the byproduct of those things if he had been willing to reach for it. He was not. He never was. The final scene earns its place as a conclusion, precisely because of where it goes, instead of the throne room. Jon rides through Castle Black, the place where he took his first vows, where he was murdered, where he was resurrected, where his watch began and ended and began again, and out through the gate, beyond the wall, into the open land where the trees grow old and the cold comes clean, and there are no thrones to sit on and no games to play. Yet the green shoots breaking through the snow as he rides are not subtle. Something is growing in the world after the long night. Life returning, spring arriving, a world that survived the darkness beginning, cautiously, to warm. Ghost is there. Ghost, the albino direwolf who has been by Jon's side since he was a pup at Winterfell, who was kept behind when Jon sailed south, and given to Tormund because it seemed impractical to bring a direwolf into a political situation. Ghost is there, and Jon finally pets him. It is a small thing, and it is enormous. Ghost has been with Jon since the very beginning, since the moment when Jon claimed the one creature that did not quite belong in the pattern of everything around it. Ghost survived. Jon survived. They find each other at the end, on the other side of everything. Tormund tells Jon, "As in the episode before this, you have the North in you, the true North." He means it as a kind of comfort and a kind of diagnosis. Jon has always been most himself in the hardest conditions. Most clearly Jon Snow in the places where survival requires everything you are and nothing you pretend to be. The palaces and the politics and the throne rooms and the negotiations, those are not where he lives. He lives in the cold. He lives in the night. He lives in the places where you cannot afford to be anything other than exactly who you are. The tragedy and the strange grace of Jon Snow's story is that it ends exactly where it began, in terms of what he is. someone on the outside of the institutions, someone who does not quite fit the frame, someone with a purpose that the world he was born into could not entirely hold. He started as the bastard of Winterfell, belonging nowhere and carrying a secret that made him more than anyone knew. He ends as the man beyond the wall, belonging to the people who were always outside the frame of Westerosi civilization, carrying forward a life that the world could not give him and could not take away. The Valyrian steel sword Longclaw goes with him, the sword given to him by Jorah Mormont, the sword that killed White Walkers at Hardhome, the sword that has been with him through every death and every resurrection, both his and other people's. In a world that has just decided it does not need kings, it still needs people willing to carry steel into the darkness. Jon Snow will be that. He always was. What makes Jon Snow the most tragic hero in Game of Thrones is not the suffering, though there is plenty of it. It is the particular flavor of the suffering of someone who keeps faith in a faithless world, who tells the truth in a world of lies, who fights for the living in a world where the dead outnumber them, and who does all of this not because the reward is certain, but because the alternative, becoming someone who stops trying, is simply not available to him. He cannot not care. He cannot not fight. He cannot not do what is right, even when right costs everything. He knows nothing, Ygritte always said. She was wrong, ultimately. He knows the only thing that matters, that the living must fight for each other, and that this obligation does not expire even when everything else does. Even the vows, even the titles, even the loves, the obligation remains. Jon Snow rides north. The cold receives him like an old friend. Yet the free folk ride beside him. Ghost runs ahead, and somewhere behind him, the world he helped save is doing the difficult, imperfect work of being free. And that is the complete story of Jon Snow. Every wound, every loss, every moment of grace, and every catastrophe, from the Tower of Joy to the true North and everything in between. He is the show's great tragic hero, not despite the fact that things went wrong for him, but because of why they went wrong. He was too good for the world he was born into, and too human to stop trying to be good anyway. If this video meant something to you, if you're lying awake somewhere with that cold northern wind in your head, I would genuinely love for you to subscribe and leave me a comment. What time is it where you are? Where are you watching from? Drop it below. And if there is another character from Game of Thrones whose complete story you want to see traced from beginning to end like this, Daenerys, Jaime Lannister, Tyrion, Sansa, Arya, tell me in the comments and I will go deep on it. The North remembers, and so do we. Thank you for watching, and may you always find warmth in the dark.